Hello guys, welcome back. In this video, we are going to create this OS application using MVVM Architecture and fetching data from an API and displaying results using Jetpack Compose. Now, as you can see here, we have created a simple application with a simple UI. So, without further ado, let's just get started. So, we are getting this data from this website here, Open Motel. So now, this website offers a lot of information. It's just free to use. So, no any API key which is needed. And if you come here, it's just have a pretty good documentation. You can click the parameters documentation, or you can just come here to this URL builder here, and then you're going to create your URL. Now, for here, you can just, for example, can select any city which you want. So if it is not located here, you can just press the flick the GPS, and then it's going just to get your GPS where you're located. Now, there is hourly variables and daily variables. Now, for this here, we are not going to use any hourly variables, so we're going to use these daily variables. So we're going to get the weather code and also maximum and minimum temperature. And also we want to get the wind speed and also the dominant wind direction. Now we can come here and also use these settings here. And after that, we're just going to use Celsius, kilometer per hour. Here we're doing the speed. And also we want the timestamp here to be at Unix timestamp so that we can customize to how we want. And you can select here to any time zone which you want. Now, after that, you can press this preview here, and then it's going to give you the preview of your data. And now, if you want to get the JSON response, you can just click this or copy this here and paste it to a new tab. So we're going to open this to a new tab here. Now, as you can see here, now we're getting here informations. And we have a lot of information here, which you can try and use it in our application. Now, if you come here to this API documentations, there is a lot of parameters here, which you can just step them and use them to your application. Now, after that, we can now navigate to Android Studio and start creating our project. Now we have navigated here to Android Studio, and then before we start here, I have added dependencies which are necessary in order to complete this application. So you can just go to the link in the description box below here and copy these dependencies. So after that, we are just good to go. Now let's create here packages. So now after creating these packages here, as you can see here, we have several packages. So we have the daily weather, where we're going to have data dependency, injection, domain, presentation, and utils. So we are going to refactor this and send it here to this presentation here. Also, we can try to change this and send it here to this main activity. Now, after that, here we have this our data, and here our data, we have the API package, and here we have models. So here we're going to create all of our models and also this thing here, the interceptors, mappers. So we're going to see later when we're going to be building the application. So for now, here we have to create the models which we're going to get them from the APIs for the classes which are going to be returned. And I'm using here a plugin which is called the Kotlin data class from JSON. So if you don't have this, you can just go to the plugin marketplace here inside Android Studio and download this. And that's going to be really easy to transfer this code from the JSON to Kotlin classes. So after that, you can just navigate here and come to the application. And after that, we can just copy all of this information here. And in order for this, we can just get here. And after that, we can just call here this API weather. And you can come here to advanced. And because we want to show that we have, can just come here to annotation, and also you have to select here, for example, you can have Moshi, or you can have Moshi Cochin, or anything else which you want. So for our case here, we're just going to use this Moshi, or you can select just this one and click OK and click generate. So the plugin has created the files. And as you can see here, we have this data class, and also it has added this data. And for example, here now we can just separate this. For example, here it is just giving us generation time, so we can reflect this to how Android is going to, or Kotlin convection, naming convection here. So we have time. And then here inside the daily unit, we can just use them. And as you can see here, it is just returning this to be in. So we want this to be double. So we can just double check here, because this one is going to be returned as double, and also time is going to be returned as long. And here with the code is int, and also here with the direction. We can just use here double. Now I think we are done creating here our models. So we are adding this activities on here in order to just transfer this, because we are using here Moshi converter, and Moshi is going to create here an adapter. So we have here the way which we want this to be named. So for example, this one is not just really good in Kotlin. So we have to use this naming convention. So for that, we are using activation and providing this. And also this JSON class is going to generate an adapter so that it can map between this what we have written here to what is coming from the API. So this one is the use of this. Now, after creating this model class here, we can just come here to this API here and create here a new package. And here we're going to create interceptors. And also you're going to create here a new package. And here we are just going to call it here mappers. So inside here interceptors, you can create a class that can intercept the request which you are sending to the API. So this one we are going to use OKHTTP, and OKHTTP is the HTTP client which is going to use to intercept the request which we are sending here from here, going to the API or to the server, and the server sending us information. So we can intercept here, for example, check out the network request, or for example, requesting to authenticate a request, or to ask about a new token, so that we can probably share our data or and do other things. So these interceptors here are really useful. So we're going just to provide here a logging interceptor for this purpose, so that we can just log our request which we are sending. So now for this here, we're going to create here a new, and then we're going just coming here and creating a new Kotlin class. And then we're going to call it logging interceptor. We're going to inject the constructor. We're going to use here the dependency injection data held. So we're going to inject here a constructor, and this one is going to inherit from HTTP. So this inject here is going to tell that data to construct and create dependency of this class so that we can use it there. So if you press here Control Q, you can see that this one is going to give you here, may apply to static as well as and other things. So we are just basically creating this and telling here that, or this application or this class must be included in the dependence, because we're going to use it to provide it to the Retrofit API when we want to inject this. So after that, we have created here our logging interceptor. Now, for example, here we can just log this to our UI. So you can try to use here Timba, but for this, we're just going to use this 15 logging API. Now, after creating here our logger, now for our case, we're just completed with this class. We can just finish here. So you can try to add here, for example, authentication, network connections, and other things, so that you can just log to a user and tell if there is something wrong, so that you can just use the interceptors. Now, for our case, we're just using these logging interceptors. Now, here we have mappers. So these mappers are going to map the API calls. So for example, these classes which are coming from the API. So we want to map this to the domain models. So we are going to create here at the moment our domain models, which we want to create and map them, so that we can just use these mappers to transform these daily, for example, here, this daily here, and transform it to the daily domain model. Now, for case here, we can try also to change these models here so that we can differentiate them. So we can just call this, for example, API daily. Now, after we finish there, we can just come here to the domain so that we can create the domain models, which we are going to use them inside our application. Now, inside here, the domain, we are going to create new packages. So we're going to call these models. And also you're going to create here a repository package. Now we have to focus here on models because we want just to create a solid foundation for our data. So let's just focus now with just these models. Then we can just come to a repository later in this video. So for now here, now we can create here a new data class. And this data class, we are going to call this current weather. So now, is it this model class here? We have the power on how we can create this. Now let's create here a new class and we're going to call this daily. So is it here also we have the power of just creating our own variables which are going to transform from what they ever bring us so that we can easily consume these. So if, for example, if we want to cache this and send it to the database, we can easily just click around and change what we want to save so that we can just save easily. So for our case here, let's create a variables. So all of these variables are going to be private. And so because of this API is going to return us list of these data, so we want to transform this and bring out another class which is going to contain all of this information by the so that we can easily consume them. So we have to transform them. So that's why we are making this private so that the user cannot access this data here. Now, after we create this to be private, we have to create another class which is going to map up and bring us in a way what we are going to receive this inside the gas not inside the list. So for here, for our case here, we're going to create another data class. And this one is another principle that if you have logic that is directly related, just clip them together. So you just couple them data class. And we're going to call this weather info. Now we have to get the temperature. Now this temperature marks is going just to be table and not a list of tables. Now, after we create this, we have to create a way because we have made this private here. We have to create this weather class and return a list of data which you're going to have for daily data. Now, for that case, we are going to create here another variable, and then we are going to call this weather info. Now we are going to loop around here. Now we have to use here the temperature marks. So for example, we're going to use one of these because all of these are going to have the same size. So we are just using one of them so that we can rope around. So here we are going just to return. Sorry, we have forgotten here, so we are initializing instead of just returning this. So for that case, you're going to return here daily with the info. And for this case here, we have to create a daily with the info. So now we have forgotten here when it must be double. So we have made this the string. Now for that quiz here, we have our weather information and then we are going to return this. So after that, we can create here our model, which is going to wrap up this current weather and daily weather. So for here, we are going to create another data class. Now, for that case here, we have our models inside the domain. So what we have to transform the data from the weather. So from this data and coming here directly to the domain. So let's just do this right now. Now let's go here to this data package here inside the API and come here to this mappers. And then we are going to create here another copying class. And first and foremost, we're going to create an interface and we are going to call this API mapper. And for this case here, we have to pass in here generic. As we have said, this mapper is going to help us to map the domain models to the API models or from the API models to the domain models so that we can just easily use them. So for example, if you want to send the data from the client to the server, so we have to create a way which we can map them to what the server understands. And for the case now, we have just the data which is coming from the server and we want the client to understand the data which we are just getting. And for this case, we are going to create only one mapper. So for here, we are going to call this domain. For example, here we're going to call this domain and here entity. So we have this two here, and then we are going to have one method here. So a class which is coming from the API entity, and then we are going to return here a model which is going to be the domain. So for that case here, we're just getting here the entity and then we're going to return this domain. So we're creating this interface like a contract that all of our mappers have to inherit this API mapper so that we are sure that everything is going to follow this format so that we avoid errors. Now, for that case, we can start now creating our mappers. Now, before we do that, we have to create a user class, which is going to help us to transform the data from one format to another format. So, for example, we are receiving data from doubles, so we want to transform them to strings that can be easily translated inside the UI. Now, let's come here to this user class. Here we have the directions which we are going to use then because we're going to get the wind in a format of degrees. So you want to translate it to a string. So we're going to use these values in order to translate date. Now, for now, we can create here another function which is going to take up the string and going to return. It's going to take up the time in the format of long and return it in format of string. Now we can call it once date. Now also we have to pass in here time. Remember, it's going to be in the format of long. And after that, we can create a simple date format. Now we can return this and format the date and pass in here the time. Now after that, we can easily reuse its method. So now let's create here and return the wind direction, the stuff, some more room here. So now we can create here a function which is going to return here. Now we want to return the direction which we have provided up there, and then we want to perform here some calculations. So we want to take this wind direction, and then we want to take this to a percentage of 360, so that we can convert any data which we are getting here, which is going to be, for example, greater than 360, because sometimes it's going to return a data which an angle which is greater than or which is negative. So we want to get the actual angle. That's why we are using this percentage sign, so that we can just get these 360 values inside this 360. After that, we can divide this by 45 so that we can get the actual angle. So what it is. So after we divide this, because our compass is going to have 8, well, it's going to have this 8 directions. So from northeast to northwest. So we are going also to add this percentage sign and divide this by 8 so that we can get the data. Now we have to wrap this to int so that we can get the data. So basically here we are just getting if we want, for example, we have here 8 values. So we are going to convert this to 8 so that to represent, because these angles, they are just going to be in a circular format. So we want to get the number of here. That's why we have arranged this. So if you want here, for example, 16, here you have to divide by 22.5, I think. And here you have to add 16 so that you can get the actual angle and add those 16 compasses. So for this, we are just going here by 8. And then for that, we are just getting here the wind direction. Now we want to format here and get the status. So we are going to get here a status in format of false. So we want to transform this in order to get in a text format. So we can just use here. And then here we have a code which is going to be of type int. Now we can use here when statement, because there is a lot of this code. So when this code is going to do this, so I have just written here this code before, and as you can see here, we're just returning here the data. So we can just call this, and here we can call return. Now, as you can see here, we have this a lot of data here, so you can just go to the documentation and see how you can just wrap it to your needs. So you can try, for example, here adding an icon or whatever. So for us, we're just going to use this interpretation here. Now, I think we are just done here creating this util class. So now let's create here a mapper class. We can just navigate here and create here a new class, and then we are just going to call this API. And now we can tell here to inject this class. This class is going to inherit from the API mapper. Now we have to pass in here the domain, and our domain here is called the daily. And also here the entity, which is called the API daily. And then we can just try to press Control. Also can press Shift F6 so that we can rename this class, because we have misspelled this class. Now we have to inherit this class and we have to implement, and we are going to implement this class. Okay. Now what we have to do, we are going to return here daily. And this is just why we have used this API interface, so that we can just have the same signature around all of these mapper classes. Now for this case here, now we can just transform this to our API. So for example, here we have time, so we want to pass this. So we can just come here and create a method that is going to pass this. So Our pattern, we just want to get the day. So this one is the pattern of getting a date, just a single E. And for that case here, we're going to pass in the time. And also we have to pass in here where the status is. And now we can pass in here. So what we're going to pass in here, we're going to pass in a list. Oh, after we pass in here, we can just use this pass with the statuses, and then we can use the API entity, and we can get the code. And we can pass in here the with a code. Now what we are remained here with passing is the wind direction, and also we have to transform this wind direction here, and also we have to create here another function. And now we have to pass in here the wind direction, and for that case we can just use the API entity and pass in here the wind direction. And here we have to pass in the wind speed, so we are just going to use the API entity to wind the speed. Now we have created here a mapper which is going to map this API daily. Now let's finish creating mapper for other classes. Now let's create here a new class, and here we are just going to call this we're just going to call this current with a mapper. Now after that we have now to return the gas. And then we're just going to create here current weather. Then here similarly current weather, it's going just to take up the similar way which we're just using this but differently. So we can copy these methods here and also paste it here. Now for our case here we have to pass in the temperature. And so instead of setting here alone, we are just going to take up a string, and here we are just going to return and list the string, not a list of string, and then now we can pass in here the weather statuses, and also we can format here our weather status, for example. Now for that, we have finished creating here our current weather mapper. Now let's create here the weather mapper. We can just come here to this and create a new class, and then we are just going to call this. Now we can implement here our function, and then here we can just return our weather. now for the first case, we have to return a current weather. So now we can use the API current weather mapper and we can map this to domain. Now we can use the API entity and pass in here current weather. Now we have also to apply the daily. Now we have finished to create our mappers. Now we can just focus on creating the network layer. Now we want to create here our API into this case. We can come here and also we have to move this inside the model because they belong here. So we can just move them there. Now after refactoring this, we can create here a new object. But we can create constants that are going to be used inside the API. So we are going to call this so we have here the API constants. Right. So I have created here the API base URL, which you can find in the applications, or you can find in the API. So we have here the API base URL, which you can find it is at the website, and also the endpoint which we are going to use, which is going to be the forecast. Now, after that, we can create another object which is going to hold up the API parameters. And now we have here several parameters, which also you can find is at the website, so that if you want to create your URL. So after that, now we can create here our API. So we are going to create a new Kotlin file, and then we are going to call this weather API. And this one is going to be an interface, and click OK so that we can start. Now let's create here our API, and for this case, in order to use this retrofit, we're going to use a suspend function, and then we're going to call this state weather data. And now if we want to pass in here parameters, we have also to tell this one is going to be what type of method. So we are going to get, and there are several methods in retrofit, which is get, post, and put, and other things. So for our case, we want to use a get. And here we have to provide the endpoint. And for our case here, we have already specified inside that API constant, and this one is going to be the API endpoint. Now we have to specify here several parameters which we want to build our URL. And to do that in retrofit, we have to use @query. So if we do this, we are telling retrofit, hey, this one is going to be a query parameter, and its name. Now we can use this API parameters, and we can call this latitude. So we want our first parameter to be in latitude. And this one is going to be of type float, or we can just keep it, even type float. That's going to be negative 6.80. Now, after that, we can just duplicate this, and it's here we can use longitude. So we are coding these values. So if you want to create a real application, this API offers another function or another method that you can access cities, and you can get all of this data. So you can create another function which is going to return you with this data. And when you want to query this, then you can provide those data. So for our case here, for simplicity, we're just going to have this one method. Now, after that, I'm going just to paste these other methods, so which are similar, but the difference here, for example, this one is going to be array of a string because the API wants that. And you can specify here, for example, this daily, because you can specify any number of parameters which you want to pass in. So for our case here, we have weather code, temperature minimum and maximum, wind speed and wind direction. And also if you want to receive the current weather, which you're going to set this to be true. And also you have to provide the time format which you want. For our case, we want Unix time. And also you can provide the time zone. Now here our API is already complete. So now we can use it inside our application. So now, before we can use these classes, we have to provide a mechanism of dependency injection and forecast. We have been using Hills, and in order to tell you how to create these classes and provide these classes, we have to create a module. So a module is just a class that is going to tell how it's going to create these classes. Now, for our case here, we have several classes. So in order to do that, we are going to create here new classes. Now, let's create here a new file, which is going to hold up our dependence. And we have created here a dependence inside our API. So we are going to create here a new class, and then we are going to call this API module. So there are classes which we don't own. For example, the retrofit. We don't own this class or the OKHTTP. So these are classes which you cannot construct and inject. So we have to use a builder in order to create them. Or for example, an interface. So we have to tell here's how to provide them. And in order to do this, we have to use the module. And we can tell it that by using that module, that is going to understand how to create all of these which are going to use them inside here. And also we have to tell it how long will it last. So for example, we want to have multiple instances of retrofit. So for our purpose, that is not true because we should only have one instance of retrofit because it is expensive to create and we don't want to create multiple instances floating around, and this is the use of this. So we can use here at install in to tell that how are they going to be used. So we provide here a script, and this one is going to be singleton component. And for this case here, we are telling it to last until when we are going to finish. So only one single component is going to be created in our application. So we have only one instance of retrofit. Now, for that, let's create here a room, and then we can use a method to provide here. Now, as you can see here, you have to insert this. I'm using here a light template in order to create this. So we can create here a function name. So for example, here we are going to use here provide. And this one is going to take up a type of builder. And then this one is going to return with API. So you want to create here with API, so we can take here return. So after we do this, we have to tell retrofit how it's going to provide. So we can use here provide. So basically here we are passing the base URL, and also we are passing here a client which is going to use the OKHTTP client, and also we have to add here a converter factory, which we are going to use a Moshi converter factory, which is going to convert between the JSON and how to convert it to Kotlin classes. So after that, here we have to tell retrofit how it's going to create the classes of how it's going to create the OpenHTTP. Now, for our case here, we are just using the OpenHTTP, and we are using here login interceptor. So if you have several interceptors, so for example, you can just provide them inside here the dependence and provide that. And because this login interceptor, we don't own it, also we have to provide it. Now we can create here another function so that we can provide the we can provide the login interceptor. Now let's add more room here, and then effectively we can create another function which we're going to call it provide. Now let's create a variable, and then we are going to call this. And when we provide that we want to go to the level of body, we can recount our interceptor, and then here we can pass in HTTP login interceptor. Now, for our case here, as you have seen, we have provided all of these classes which are necessary to use our API module. So when we want to use all of this API, now Hist knows how to create this app in these classes. Now, after that, we can just navigate here, and also we have another dependency injection which we have to provide. So this does not belong here. We have just to press Control X and cut it, and this belongs to this data here. So we can just place it inside here, and we can refactor it. Now, after that, here we can create a new class. Sorry, but a Java class. We're just going to create a Kotlin class, and then we are going to call this activity. Now, before we create the dependency of this activity retain, then this is going to be an abstract class. So before we do this, we have to create the domain repository. So we have to provide here a repository so that you can create this, because we want to create here the repository. This repository is to be inside this one. So let's create here a new Kotlin file, and here we are going to create an interface, and here we are going to call this weather repository. Now, before we create here in a method, we are going to create a state that is going to represent to us how we are going to define our state. So if we are loading, or if we get error or anything else, so we are going to create here a new class, and this one is going to be a sealed class. And then we're going to call this a state. So we are going to use here generics, and here now we have to create our data, and then this one is going to be for this type 3, and it's going to be nullable, because sometimes you're not going to have the data, so we have to return null and return the message. And here we are going to have the message, which is going to be of type string, and this one also is going to be nullable, and by default it's going to be null. So sometimes we don't have any error message to display, so we're going to pass in null. Now after that, we have to provide here a class. So for here, we are going to call this loading. So this one is going to be after the state. And here now we have to call our state. So this one is going to inherit from this state. And after that, we are not going to pass anything, because in loading, we don't have data or any error message. Now we are going to create here a class for success. So if we are successful, now we have to pass in here data. So we know that this data is not going to be nullable. So we have the data. We pass it to the state and pass in here the data which we have obtained, and create here another class which is going to be of Kara. And here we can pass in message. And after that, we are going to pass in here the state, and here we are going to pass in the message. Now, so here we are basically creating three states for loading, success, and error. So if we are successful, we pass in the data. If we have error, we pass in the error messages. Now, after that, let's just come here to this with a repository, and now we can create our first function here. And this one, we are going to call this get weather data. And now this function here is going to give us we're going to pass in here the state. And for our case here, it's going to return the state of weather. Now, after that, we are going to create here an implementation, which is going to inherit from this weather repository. So this one is for testing purposes, and we have one, so we can define here several methods if we want to. Now, after that, let's create here a new class. And now here we are going to create this, and then we are going to call this weather. With a repository implementation. Now let's inject here a constructor. And here we are going to provide the what it's called weather API. So we want to obtain this weather API, and also we want also to have here the weather mapper. So we are going to call this API weather mapper. So after we get these two dependencies, so we can now launch here. And also we have not forgot that we have to implement our weather repository. And now we have this function here. Now we have to try here instead the try catch block. So we are going to start here to get the weather API. So we want to get here the API weather. So this one is going to be the entity, which is going to be returned by the saver. So after this one, now we can use our weather API and we can get here our data. Now, in order to get here our data, after that, we are going to call this file. Yeah. And now we have to get our weather. Now here our domain weather model. And for this case here, now we are going to use this. We're going to use the API weather mapper. And we want to map this to domain, and we can use this API weather. Now what we want to return here, we want to return a state, a success state. So we'll lead. So we are going to pass in here weather. So for our test here now, our weather is yes. So we are getting here our data, and also here you have to make sure that you are going to return this API weather. Now after that you can come here to it. So here we are returning here our state of success. Now let's pass in here the catch. Now first we want to print the structures, and then we are going to create here. And then we can pass in here e.message. Now this one. So the message can be empty, so we are going to return this or empty if it's going to be empty. So now, as you can see here, now we are trying here to call this API service. So if we get any errors, so we are going to return them, and we're going to print this to the stack trace in order to get this. So now we have created here our simple weather repository implementation. Now we can go to here to activity retained module, and we can provide now. So now this still data that this is going to be a module. So we are going to add in here a module. And then we're going to add in here the install in so that we can tell how it's going to be scoped. So here we are going to use the activity retain the scope component. So we are going to use this component. So this one is basically going to survive our activity configuration. As you can see here, that has the lifetime of configuration surviving activity. So this one is going to be destroyed when the activity has been destroyed also. So now after that, we are going to create here an abstract function that we are going to call this bind. And this one is going to return here a weather or as a repository. Now we also have to tell data that this one is going to be a bind. So we're going to use this bind. And also we have to provide this one is going to be activity retain the scopes. So for this case here, we have already told data to provide all of these functions for all of these classes. Now, after I manage to create this class, we have to create an application class that is going to generate all of these components. So for this case, we have to create here a custom application class. Then come here to the US and create a new Kotlin class or file. And this one we are going to call this with application. And here we have to implement from this application class. And we can just remove these brackets here. Now, after that, we have to tell this class is going to be used by Hilt. And to do this, we have to use Hilt and app. So this one is going to tell you to generate the call all those components which we have been injecting. Now, after that, we have to register this inside the manifest class here, and we have to do here to add the Android name, and as it has suggested here. Now, because we fucked up there the web application, the main activity to the presentation layer, we have also to refactor here. So now we can get here, as you can see, it is starting from presentation to main activity. Also, we should not forget to add here an internet permission, because we are going to use internet for things. We have finished creating here our classes. Now, for that case, we can now come here also to the presentation layer and come to the main activity. And also we can trigger here and call at Android entry point. So as you can see here, we are going to mark the component to be set up for injection within the standard head. So we are using this to set up that there is something which is going on with that health. Now we have to rebuild our project and see if we don't have any error, so that we can continue finishing our application. Now let's rebuild. Now let's create here our UI part, and we can come here to our UI. As you can see here, we have theme, and also can create here a new package, which we are going to create our UI. So we are going to call this daily as a package, and inside here daily as a package, we can create a new protein class or file. So let's create first our view model. So we are going to call this daily as a view model. So we are going to inherit this from the view model. And now we have to inject this. And here we have to pass in the repository implementation. Now we have to create our state, which we're going to use it. So we're going to create here state. You can use a dedicated method. So we have a mutable state of. So here also what we have to create another helper class, which is going to hold up the state. Now we are going to create here data class, and this class we are going to call it. Now, for our case, we only have one variable, which is going to be our weather. So if you have multiple variables, you can try to create them. And let's just import this. Now, here we have only one variable, which we're going to use it. And for here, we have to pass in the state, which we have created there. And this one is going to be of type weather. And for the first case, we are going to start by loading. So if there is nothing here, we are going to be at the loading state. So for this case here, we are going to pass in our daily weather state and create a new variable. Now, after that, we have to initialize here our variables. Also, we have to restrict this to be a private set, so that we can only set this inside here. Also, we have to change this to var. Now we have to initialize here. So when the view model is going to be created, we're going to fetch the data from the API. So we are going to use here view model scope, because we are calling a sustained transcan. We are going to call it here at launch. Now, after that, we can now call our API and create here. So we're going to state here, and then what we have to do now, we can use our daily state and use the repository and get rid of the data. Now we have here our data, and now we are getting our data inside this state. And now I think here we don't have to write anything else inside our tool model, and we can start to use it. For now, let's end up this video here, because I'm going to focus on the next video on the UI part and how we can hook up all of this So for now, let's leave it here. See you in the next video.